nuclear technology, weapons technology, is 80 years old. And Iran is a country of over 90 million people with a very large scientific establishment among the top countries in the Persian Gulf in terms of physicists, engineers. And so really the critical thing about building a nuclear weapon is the knowledge base. The physical technology itself is something that can be destroyed and replaced. And quite clearly, some of the targets that were hit were damaged but not destroyed.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Heroes Path podcast. I'm Colonel John Fensel. We're recording this at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on day 90. And just about an hour ago, the President of the United States posted to social media from inside the White House Situation Room, where he's meeting with his national security team right now to announce the conditions for signing the Iran deal. At least that's what is being reported. Trump wrote, Iran must agree to never have a nuclear weapon or bomb. The Strait of Hormuz must be immediately open. No tolls for unrestricted shipping traffic. No money will be exchanged until further notice, and that's significant. We'll talk about that here in a second. Other items of far less importance have been agreed to. He then said, I will be meeting now in the Situation Room to make a final determination. So that's what's happening right now. Tonight, this podcast isn't a weekly wrap. Therefore, it's a live report. And here's where things stood before the Situation Room convened. The U.S. and Iran negotiators reached a tentative memorandum of understanding on Thursday. It was a 60-day ceasefire extension. Hormuz opens, mines cleared, the naval blockade lifts in parallel. And then Reuters confirmed with 4 separate sources, and we understand these terms were all agreed by all levels of Iranian leadership, and that remains to be seen. But Trump's social media post today explicitly contradicts Iran's claim from earlier today that $12 billion in frozen assets was secured as part of that MOU. Ghalibaf, Iran's parliament speaker, said that Tehran will achieve its rights not through dialogue, but with missiles. So that's on the day today of the Situation Room meeting. The New York Times is also reporting significantly that the draft MOU references a possible $300 billion post-war international investment fund to aid Iran's reconstruction. It's an initiative that was originated by Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, both of whom, as we know, are real estate investors who propose promoting investment projects in Tehran if a final deal is reached. So there we are. We're 3 months in. The president's in the Situation Room. The lead Iranian negotiator is talking about missiles, and there's a deal framework that may or may not survive the next 2 hours. So that's the picture, and we're going to try to get this posted before all of that goes out the window. But Jeff Steinberg has been the clearest voice in this community from day one. Tonight, he tells us what the tentative agreement actually means and what it will take for Trump to sign it. Jeff, thanks for being back with us.
Well, I think you've very nicely summarized kind of a snapshot of the moment. I think to take a deeper dive on those exact points, it seems clear to me that the Trump administration would like to basically declare victory, to spin whatever agreement is reached and basically identify it as something that met the U.S. criterion from the start of this conflict. And the Iranians very much need to be able to do the same thing for their internal audience. The Iranian regime has been able to secure the internal affairs of the country, but the economic conditions and related things are now such that they've got to be concerned that they can demonstrably come out of this with a claim of victory and success and get some of the economic benefits moving forward, because the current leadership wants to stay in power, and so they've got to spin this. I think that the framework of the agreement leaves a lot of things unresolved and unanswered, but there's a general sense, both in Washington and Tehran, that they want this 60-day ceasefire extension. I think it's noteworthy that President Pezeshkian has been in regular contact with the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and Marco Rubio is meeting with the top Pakistani officials. There's a trip to Islamabad, and there's also been other Pakistani officials in Washington. So the Pakistani mediation of this has been rather critical. And quite clearly, Pakistan has the backing of Beijing in playing this kind of mediating role, as well as the support of major countries in the Arab world. The fly in the ointment is Israel. The Israelis are basically unhappy with anything that falls short of full-scale regime change. They can't do it on their own, and they've got to do it with a complete commitment of the United States to move the war forward. The Mike Pompeo's Lindsey Graham, I think, telegraphed an important aspect of the situation when he went from harshly criticizing Trump for basically being willing to extend the ceasefire and reach a deal, to responding in the exact opposite way a day later when Trump announced that one of the conditions that he is seeking is for all of the Arab states that are participating in this whole effort to end the war signing on to the Abraham Accords. That $300 billion figure that you mentioned is the sweetener for basically the Abraham Accords going forward, and even including Iran as a future member. So there's a kind of a grand vision for Donald Trump. The capstone of his second term as president is achieving this kind of broader Abraham Accords in which all of the major Arab states and perhaps Iran ultimately sign on to their peace agreement with Israel. That's the sweetener for Netanyahu, and one of the reasons why the Israelis have not done something even beyond what they're doing in Lebanon to completely sabotage any kind of agreement. So you've got the U.S. with a vested interest in getting this ceasefire and spinning it in a way that it's presented domestically as a victory. You've got the Iranians in the same kind of situation, obviously getting a certain kind of indirect pressure from China through Pakistan to go ahead with this. And again, Ghalibaf's comments indicate that they've got to spin it in a way that is palpable for the domestic Iranian population. And Israel is trying to come up with angles for sabotaging the whole thing and putting Trump in the position where he's got no choice but to go full bore on regime change, meaning ground operations and all the rest.
Well, it's interesting too, Jeff. I read in the Times of Israel today that the UAE conducted dozens of strikes on Iran during the war and then after the truce as well, including alongside Israel. And if that's confirmed, this means that the Gulf states, state that's been the loudest about pursuing diplomacy and warning against regional escalation, was simultaneously conducting offensive strikes on Iranian territory. And so that changes the whole map of who was fighting. It means that Iran targeting UAE's infrastructure throughout the war wasn't just irrational targeting or retaliation. It might have been a response to active UAE military participation. So this really has been a regional war, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And remember, the UAE, of all of the Gulf countries, was the only significant player to join the Abraham Accords from the beginning. UAE has maintained underground close economic relations and security relations with Israel for years and years and years. And so in some respects, they were sort of the odd man out as the rest of the major Gulf countries shunned the Abraham Accords because of the Palestine issue. And so basically, I think, though, that as it came down to the question of whether or not the war would resume as a full-scale phase two, UAE came around to align with the Saudis, the Turks, the Qataris, Oman, and others, and Kuwait to want this thing to not go back to full-blown war because they're uncertain about how much defense capability the U.S. and Israel are capable of providing. Iran did a lot of damage to UAE, above all others, for the reason you just cited, that they've been the closest to Israel all along, and they got Iron Dome assistance. There were Israeli personnel manning Iron Dome capabilities as the phase of the war that began on February 28th was unfolding.
Well, I heard the price that we've paid just with regard to all of our advanced weapons stockpiles with Operation Epic Fury. The estimated cost for that is $25 billion, and it's also estimated it's going to take years, not months, to replenish all those stocks, right?
Yeah, the estimate is 6 years under current production capacity. And as you know, to expand production capacity is not something that you can do overnight. It's a multi-year process. And there's $350 billion in Pentagon money that's earmarked for expansion of our defense industrial base. That's a special project of the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Stephen Feinberg. But it's not clear that Congress is going to approve that money under the current circumstances.
Yeah, and we're talking about precision-guided munitions, anti-ship missiles, advanced air-to-surface missiles, drones,
Right.
You name it. I mean, it's the whole gamut.
The National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2027 proposes further integration of Israeli defense firms inside the U.S. defense technology base. They're talking about Israeli companies being licensed to manufacture drones and other things in parts of the United States as a kind of a super treaty relationship. And I think that it's being pushed right now because the sympathy for Israel within the U.S. population is waning. Polling data indicates that particularly among younger people, the attitude towards Israel has shifted pretty dramatically.
Well, now, Jeff, there's been a significant intelligence story also this week that I think deserves attention. That it was from the DIA. They produced a preliminary assessment that nuclear strikes have set Iran back only by months, not years. And we talked a little bit about that before we came on this afternoon. But then the CIA director immediately pushed back on that. What does our audience need to understand about that whole contradiction?
Nuclear technology, weapons technology, is 80 years old. And Iran is a country of over 90 million people with a very large scientific establishment, probably among the top countries in the Persian Gulf in terms of physicists, engineers. And so really the critical thing about building a nuclear weapon is the knowledge base. The physical technology itself is something that can be destroyed and replaced. And quite clearly, some of the targets that were hit both in June of 2025 and again during the current post-February 28th war were damaged but not destroyed. And so some of that material has been recovered. There's almost universal admission that there are significant stockpiles, something like 400 plus kilos of 60% enriched uranium. It seems to be the case that the location where they are buried is well known. President Trump has, on several public appearances, commented that they've got satellites monitoring those facilities and making sure that nothing is being done to move them to another location. So I think that the DIA assessment in this case, I suspect, is accurate. And of course, CIA Director Ratcliffe is the most political member of the intelligence community and has been in on all of the planning and all of the decisions. We may find out that Ratcliffe himself gave one of those George Tenet slam dunk promises to President Trump about regime change. And so, I discount his pushback and tend to value the DIA assessment, which also matches other assessments that have been reported in the Washington Post and New York Times and CNN coming from CIA itself.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, so here we are, at this 3-month mark, 90 days. Let's take a full accounting for all of our audience. What has this war cost in every dimension? I mean, things like the human toll, more than 3,400 people killed in Iran, over 2,000 in Lebanon, 23 in Israel, 13 U.S. service members, plus civilians across the Gulf states. That's the human cost. And then there's also that whole figure of 168 children and 14 teachers killed when a missile strike hit that girls' school in Manab in southern Iran's province. And that was on the first day of the war. The economic toll on Iran currency, their currency has been in free fall since the war began. The economic toll in the United States, I don't know what gas is down there in Florida right now, but up here, just for diesel, it's $5.50 a gallon.
And we're in the 430 a gallon for regular unleaded.
Yeah, so Brent crude around $97 to $100. That's down
Right.
from $126 on April 29th. But then the military cost, the U.S. is going to need years, as you were just talking about, to replenish those advanced weapon stocks. You said up to 6 years. So, this whole war has been extraordinarily expensive, and it will be interesting to see what comes out for the conflict, war resolution phase of this and what it's going to further cost us as well. What are your comments on that?
Yeah, I think everything that you said is absolutely true. And I think there's other dimensions that need to be added to the picture. Number one, we think about oil as the principal commodity that passes through the Straits of Hormuz, but that's emphatically not the case. Fertilizer, grains, there are many other components, including components related to some of the most advanced elements of the world economy that are also in shortfall. The bond market is going through tremendous turbulence, both government bond markets and commercial bonds, because the inflation factor makes it clear that any thoughts about a reduction in interest rates over the coming months is highly unlikely, which means that the costs of servicing of debt are being greatly expanded. There's extensive discussion about a dangerous blowout of the bond market. And I think there's another very fascinating thing that just came out just a few hours ago, which is that the Chinese have long anticipated some kind of a conflict in the Persian Gulf. They developed by far the world's largest strategic reserve of oil and also developed a comprehensive plan for how to reduce their dependence on oil in the event of something like a shutdown of the Straits of Hormuz. So the Chinese have switched certain industrial applications from gas and oil to coal. And as the result, the Chinese have reduced their imports, daily imports of oil, by about 30 to 40%. And as the result of that, we can say that the price of oil, as bad as it is, hovering between $90 and $100, is not the $200 that had been projected by Goldman Sachs and others at the start of the war. And the large reason for that is that China, one of the largest importers of oil and gas, had a contingency plan in place for basically scaling back their needs for the duration of the conflict. So we would have been talking about a far worse situation if your diesel fuel was $8 a gallon and regular unleaded was up around $6. So I think that the economic toll of this war is in the trillions if you consider what's been lost to the global economy as a whole.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, we could go on and on. There's so many more dimensions to this, but 3 months ago this week, we sat down with you, tried to understand what was just beginning, and we said then that the opening strikes weren't the whole picture at all. We said that the Strait was the strategic lever. We said that the diplomatic track and the military track were not separate. So all of that has held. I mean, that's been the cohesive picture that our listeners have gotten throughout on this podcast, and we've started from day one. But tonight, the deal is on the table and it's still unsigned. The Strait is closed and it's being negotiated. The guns are still firing as the negotiators are talking. And so here's what we know. We know that an MOU isn't a peace treaty. It's just a framework. A 60-day extension isn't resolution. A signed document on Hormuz isn't going to answer the nuclear question. So whatever is signed in the coming days is going to be the beginning of the next phase of the conflict, not the end of this one. So in other words, the deal that gets signed is not the deal that ends the war. We know that, and that's going to continue. What would you say about that, Jeff?
And again, if we don't continuously look at the factor of Israel as a potential deal breaker, then we're missing just how fragile this is. But I think on the positive side of the ledger, these negotiations are no longer being handled by two real estate guys who wouldn't know a nuclear weapon if they stumbled on it. You've got professional diplomats from the Arab world, from Pakistan, You've got communications going back and forth between Rubio and Lavrov and Rubio and Wang Yi. And so I think that, frankly, unless this was going to be a slam bam kind of completely unenforceable deal, you're going to need 60 days to have people with the technical expertise sit down. Remember that the foreign minister of Iran negotiated the original JCPOA. He was part of the team. And there are others who've got that direct experience on the Iran side. And hopefully we're putting some professionals into play on the U.S. side to match everybody else who's at the table.
Yeah.
So I think that the 60 days is actually, in my mind, a more positive indication that effort will be put into actually working something out that could actually result. And from Trump's standpoint, he's reaching for the gold ring. And the gold ring is the Abraham Accords. And the idea that if he leaves his presidency saying that he's transformed the Middle East, that doesn't mean that the current leadership in Iran is not in power. But he's already said that regime change already happened. The original Ali Khamenei is dead. The top command structures are dead. Everybody knows that Iran had a succession plan that ran 20 levels deep at every important position. They decentralized their military command. They were ready for this. And so I think that there's a lot of motives for not going back to the heavy-handed shooting war, both in the United States and in Iran. And the only player that really wants this thing to go back to the hot war phase and end with full regime change is the Israelis. And Netanyahu's got to be cautious because he doesn't want to crush Trump. And he's also got a very tough election coming up October 27th.
Yeah. Well, Jeff Steinberg, thank you. You've been right every week, and there's still a long way to go, as you mentioned. We're going to have you back next Friday if we can possibly do it. Stay informed, stay grounded. The deal that gets signed isn't the deal that ends the war. Watch what comes after that signature. This is Colonel John Fenzel. Stay curious, stay engaged, and until next week, thanks for listening to the Heroes Path podcast. Bye-bye now.